On November 23rd, the world was stunned when the White House unexpectedly announced a new medical assistance program for Africa. Trump declared that the United States would provide cancer treatment drugs to countries across the continent, a message that, at first glance, seemed compassionate and humanitarian. But only hours later, doubts began to surface. People started asking, is this truly an effort to help, or merely a cover for testing experimental drugs on Africa once again? Is this a genuine aid program, or a new trap designed by Washington to pressure President Traoré into compliance? The story is far more complex than it first appeared. And to understand the real purpose behind this seemingly good proposal, stay with us for the full video. When the White House unveiled its so-called medical breakthrough for Africa, officials described it as a landmark initiative, an offer of cancer medication intended to save lives across the continent. But behind the polished podium, behind the reassuring tone of policy advisors, the documents told another story entirely. The program was not a gift. It was not even a partnership. It was a political contract, one that demanded African nations align with United States geopolitical strategy in exchange for access to the treatment. The most striking detail was not the conditions themselves, but who appeared first on the list of targeted countries: Burkina Faso, a young nation led by a leader who had refused to bend, refused to sell its voice, and refused to trade its sovereignty for promises wrapped in elegant language. In the eyes of Washington, this made Burkina Faso a test one that needed to be pressured, shaped, or isolated. But the deeper concern was the medicine itself. Internal briefing papers revealed the cancer drug formula had not completed full clinical trials inside the United States. Safety evaluations remained unfinished. Data sets were incomplete, and one chilling assumption echoed through the leaked pages: that African populations would serve as the early recipients, the trial subjects under the banner of humanitarian aid. Behind closed doors, analysts and diplomats whispered questions they dared not speak publicly. Why were untested treatments being sent abroad before completing American trials? Why were African nations being pressured to accept conditions unrelated to health? And why was political loyalty being written into a medical agreement meant to protect human life? For Burkina Faso, the dilemma was more than medical. It struck at the dignity of a nation that had worked tirelessly to reclaim its independence. The choice presented by Washington was clear: accept the drugs and the political strings, or reject the offer and face consequences the United States was fully prepared to unleash. But what happened next would redefine the balance of power between Africa and the West. As the announcement from Washington spread across global media, the atmosphere in Ouagadougou changed instantly. Inside Burkina Faso's presidential compound, ministers, health experts, military advisors, and senior officials were urgently called into a late-night meeting. What began as a medical offer now clearly resembled political pressure. The first file opened in the room contained the leaked documents. Inside were details confirming that the cancer medication proposed for Africa had not completed clinical trials in the United States. Safety data was incomplete. Several reports showed gaps and alarming uncertainties. The meaning was obvious. The drug was not ready, the risks were unknown, and yet African citizens were expected to accept it without question. Burkina Faso's Minister of Health spoke first. She calmly explained that no ethical medical authority anywhere could approve a treatment with such little evidence. Those in the room understood instantly. This was not medicine. This was geopolitics disguised as humanitarian aid. The Foreign Affairs team then reviewed the political conditions hidden in the proposal. Accepting the medication meant publicly supporting American foreign policy positions, including issues far beyond health. In essence, Burkina Faso would be trading its diplomatic independence for an untested drug. For a nation that had worked hard to rebuild its sovereignty, this was unacceptable. Economic advisors warned that rejecting the offer could lead to sanctions from Washington. Security officials added that Burkina Faso could face diplomatic isolation. Then an elderly advisor, who had served under multiple governments, spoke quietly. When a nation abandons its dignity, it abandons its future. No medicine can heal that. The room fell silent. Everyone knew the decision would require courage, and what happened next would resonate across the African continent. When night settled over Ouagadougou, people waited anxiously. Rumors spread everywhere. President Ibrahim Traoré would address the nation. Families gathered around radios and televisions. Across Africa, from Mali to South Africa, millions tuned in. Not because Burkina Faso was powerful, but because it had become a symbol of something Africa long desired, the courage to speak without fear. The broadcast began simply. No dramatic stage, just Traoré standing before his people. His voice was calm, steady, and firm. He explained the truth behind the American proposal. The drug had not passed safety trials, and the supposed medical program came with political strings attached. Then he paused and delivered the sentence that would echo across Africa. Africans are not laboratory subjects. If anyone wishes to test a drug, they can start with their own citizens. The words spread instantly across the continent. This was not a rejection of medicine, it was a rejection of exploitation. Many said it was the clearest statement of African dignity heard in years. Then came the line that defined the moment. We know the price of cancer medication, but we also know the price of freedom, and we will never trade one for the other. Social media across Africa exploded. Hashtags appeared in multiple languages. Commentators and young people embraced the message as a declaration of sovereignty. Even critics of Traoré admitted that Africa had finally spoken with a unified voice. In Washington, the reaction was swift and angry. But that conflict belongs to the next chapter, where global power and African resolve collide in ways no one saw coming. When Washington reacted with anger, something unexpected happened across Africa. Instead of turning away from Burkina Faso, many nations stood beside it. Mali, Niger, Guinea, and South Africa all declared that no country in Africa should accept untested medicine in exchange for political obedience. Independent medical groups and ethical boards supported them. They stated clearly, if a drug is not proven safe for Americans, it should not be tested on Africans. This message spread quickly. Social media in multiple African languages repeated one phrase again and again: medicine cannot replace sovereignty. Inside Burkina Faso, President Ibrahim Traoré acted fast. Instead of backing down, he announced 3 major steps: a new African Cancer Treatment Support Fund, a Sahel partnership to produce safe medication locally, a regional health network not controlled by foreign governments. These decisions changed the situation completely. What began as a political threat became a moment of unity and pride. Families, elders, and community leaders across Burkina Faso said they finally felt a government choosing dignity over fear. Across the continent, people understood this was bigger than one country. It was a statement: Africa will not be pressured, and Africa will not be used. And soon, the rest of the world would be forced to pay attention. Inside the United States, the political and media reaction to the Burkina Faso crisis became increasingly complicated. Some commentators defended the original American proposal, insisting it was a practical approach to support developing nations. But as more details surfaced, many older Americans, especially those who had lived through past controversies in global health, began asking a simple yet powerful question: if this cancer medication was safe, why did it skip full American testing? This question quietly shook the confidence of both policymakers and viewers at home. Medical ethicists appeared on national broadcasts explaining that experimental drugs must follow strict procedures inside the country before being introduced elsewhere. Their calm explanations exposed a deeper flaw. The proposal to Africa violated standards that Americans expect for themselves. In Congress, a few lawmakers voiced discomfort. They did not criticize the United States directly, but their comments hinted at growing unease. One representative stated, "Humanitarian aid must never come with political strings attached." Another asked why African nations were being required to show diplomatic loyalty before receiving medical support. Meanwhile, foreign policy analysts observed a broader issue. The United States had been losing influence in the Sahel region for years. The proposal to Burkina Faso, instead of restoring American presence, had unintentionally strengthened the resolve of nations resisting outside pressure. As these debates unfolded, one truth became obvious across American media. President Ibrahim Traoré had forced the nation to confront uncomfortable questions about ethics, leadership, and the proper use of power. Even voices that did not support his politics admitted he had spoken with rare moral clarity. And while America was struggling with its own reflection, the rest of the world was already reacting. Across the world, governments, analysts, and international organizations began reassessing what had happened between Washington and Ouagadougou. What many Western officials expected to be a simple diplomatic correction had instead turned into a global case study on sovereignty and moral leadership. European commentators reacted first. Several newspapers in France, Germany, and the United Kingdom published editorials acknowledging that Africa had long faced political pressure disguised as humanitarian assistance. For the first time in many years, these publications placed Burkina Faso at the center of a broader conversation about dignity and independence. Some even described President Ibrahim Traoré as one of the few leaders willing to say openly what others only whisper. In Asia, foreign policy think tanks watched the situation with strategic interest. They noted that the American proposal seemed designed to regain influence in the Sahel, a region where multiple powers now compete for partnerships. Analysts in India, China, and Indonesia pointed out that the backlash against the United States reflected a shifting global balance, one where African nations were increasingly willing to challenge traditional hierarchies. Meanwhile, major African media networks, including those focused on African news coverage, elevated the Burkina Faso story to the top of their broadcasts. Traoré's remarks were replayed daily. "We know the price of medicine, but we also know the price of freedom." These words became more than a quote. They became a reference point in discussions about ethics, healthcare, and neo-colonial pressure. Academics debated the implications. Young Africans shared the speech widely as a symbol of a new generation of leadership. Even leaders of countries not directly involved commented that Burkina Faso had taken a stand for the continent, not just for itself. And slowly, a remarkable shift became visible. The world was no longer focused on whether the United States had overstepped. It was focused on how Burkina Faso, a nation often overlooked by global powers, had commanded the world's attention by holding its ground. This transformation set the stage for an even deeper twist, one that would reveal the true depth of the political game unfolding behind the scenes. Just when global attention began to settle, a new leak surfaced, one that changed the understanding of the entire crisis. An international investigative consortium released a series of internal reports from a major United States health contractor, and the documents revealed something stunning. Burkina Faso had not been the first country approached with the untested cancer medication. Months earlier, according to the leaked files, the United States had quietly offered the same drug to a different African nation. That government refused after its medical board raised concerns about incomplete safety data. The rejection triggered frustration among American officials, who feared losing influence in a region where geopolitical competition had intensified. Burkina Faso, seen as smaller and easier to pressure, became the next target. But the twist did not end there. The documents also showed that certain consultants had predicted President Ibrahim Traoré would resist the offer. They warned Washington that Burkina Faso had become increasingly assertive under his leadership. Yet the proposal was pushed forward anyway, with the assumption that political pressure combined with the promise of medical assistance would eventually force compliance. These revelations spread across world media in a single day, shifting the narrative overnight. What once looked like a disagreement became evidence of a deeper strategic attempt to regain influence in the Sahel. And for millions of Africans reading the reports, the conclusion felt undeniable. Burkina Faso had not merely rejected a flawed offer, it had exposed a global power play. The stage was set for a second, even more surprising turn. As the leaked documents spread across global newsrooms, the response inside Africa changed from solidarity to determination. The revelations confirmed what many had long suspected. Powerful nations were still attempting to shape Africa's political destiny through pressure disguised as aid. But now, thanks to one decisive moment, that pattern had been exposed in the open. President Ibrahim Traoré acted quickly, not with anger, but with strategy. He announced that the newly formed African Cancer Treatment Support Fund had secured commitments from several African governments within days. Medical researchers from the Sahel, West Africa, and the Horn of Africa began coordinating directly, developing plans to produce safe pharmaceuticals without relying on foreign laboratories. Regional leaders called it a continental turning point. What started as a defensive response became the foundation of a new African health independence movement, and to the surprise of analysts worldwide, Burkina Faso, once labeled a small, easily pressured nation, was now considered the moral center of this transformation. Western commentators noted the irony. The attempt to pressure Burkina Faso had elevated Traoré's stature far beyond what Washington expected. He was no longer simply the leader of a single nation. He had become a symbol of Africa's refusal to be dictated to, a reminder that dignity cannot be traded or negotiated. By the end of the week, the narrative had completely shifted. Burkina Faso was not isolated, it was leading. The United States was not strengthening its influence, it was losing it. And across the continent, millions believed they were witnessing the rise of a new chapter in African politics. The stage was now set for a conclusion that carried both hope and warning. In the end, this story was never just about a package of cancer medication. It was about something far deeper, something every American over the age of 40 understands instinctively: dignity, self-worth, and the right of a nation to choose its own future. When Burkina Faso stood firm, it reminded the world that true freedom is not granted by outside powers. It is claimed by those willing to defend it, even when the cost is high. President Ibrahim Traoré's words continue to echo through African news broadcasts, through crowded markets, and through quiet living rooms across the continent. We do not ask permission to be free. We stand up to claim it. Today, Burkina Faso symbolizes a new awakening, an Africa refusing to trade its sovereignty for promises wrapped in generous language. A continent deciding that innovation, healthcare, and dignity must come from within, not from those who expect political obedience in return. And you, watching from afar, are part of this moment. You witnessed a young leader challenge an old system and win not through force, but through moral clarity. If the spirit of Ibrahim Traoré touched your heart, share this story. If you believe that truth matters more than headlines, subscribe and stay with us on this journey toward a proud, independent Africa. May God bless Africa, and may He bless every soul who stands for freedom.